Hello FPL managers, welcome to the 50th episode of the FPL Optimized podcast. This is the podcast in which we combine analytics with the good old eye test. I am Sertab, your host today, and my co-host Buzz is still out. Data or grass, or data and grass? That's the question. Thanks for tuning in again. Last week we had Johnny Curry as a guest who had a great season. Today I will be joined by Formadillo, who had a completely opposite experience last season. Let me provide some context when I say the opposite experience. Formadillo finished last season around 290k, if I remember correctly, despite having an XG rank of 49. For people who are not familiar with the XG rank, it is calculated based on underlying stats. For example, like expected goals, expected assists, expected clean sheets. And he was among the top 50 managers among all FPL managers last season. So it is very remarkable despite the noise such metrics can include. But his actual rank doesn't reflect his decision making at all. And he's also well known with his great tweets, which we will discuss in a bit. As far as I know, Formadillo was trying analytics for the first time last season, so I wanted to emphasize that despite we have some good examples like Johnny Curry, it is not a certain outcome. So sometimes you use the same methodology and you can finish with a great rank. Sometimes you can finish, around like 290k. By having Formadillo, I hope we can shed some light to decision-making process even under stressful times. Personally, I had an unlucky season, as you might know, but by no means is close to Formadillo's epic season, I should say. Before we dive into Formadillo's decision-making and extreme negative variance, let's welcome Formadillo to the show.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thanks,
go ahead.
Sartop. Very happy to be here.
So, welcome again. And let me start with a warm-up question. How did you end up using analytics for FPL in the first place? Can you tell us about your FPL history and things that convince you to use analytics at the end?
Sure. So I guess I'll preface this, with the note that I'm definitely still an intermediate, I would say, at best, from an analytics point of view. And I don't necessarily intend to go beyond, being an intermediate. I think uh, using the tools and developing your own tools to take this to the next level is pretty time intensive,
Mm-hmm.
requires learning a lot of skills that frankly I'm probably not going to do, but it's been fun to sort of reach this intermediate point, which I think is a happy medium. In terms of how I got here, so I started playing a few years ago. I think this will be my 8th season,
Mm-hmm.
roughly. Um, I started very casually, just a mini league with some folks in college. I went over to England for college, so got looped into the Premier League, got looped into FPL. First couple of seasons, very casual. I think I did pretty well, but everyone involved was what you'd call a casual now. So finishing 100k, 150k was pretty strong in that league. I never really used the eye test that much because I just didn't watch that many games.
Mm-hmm.
I watch Everton now and again, but that's about it. So from the beginning, I was using like proxy metrics, but not analytically rigorous ones. So at
Mm-hmm.
the start, it was just like find some good fixture tickers, look up, straight up goals plus assist numbers, which is funny to think about now. And then after a couple seasons of that, I would say the next few seasons I started using some like very rudimentary analytics tools. So I remember going on Understat a lot and looking up
Mm-hmm.
just like raw XGI, NPXG, etc. But I didn't know about sample sizes. So I'd literally look them up and I'd be like, wow, this guy's been running really hot for like 3 or 4 games. He must be a great pick, right?
Yeah.
So I was using those. And then I think the last couple seasons, I started getting into it. So last season, I think I was intermediate level. I used review pretty much every week
Mm-hmm.
and tried to be very patient with decisions. The season before that, I used review a bit, but not super consistently. And I think I had a pretty mediocre MD rank, like 5,000 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, pretty much 2 seasons now of analytics. One pretty casual, the last one more intense. And I'm probably going to stay around this level, I think, moving forward.
Okay, awesome. So let's start with the last season, because I mean, obviously that's our focus in today's episode. So what was your process in terms of using analytics for FPL? I mean, I understand that you have been using the prediction data, and you have been using FPL reviews projections for it. But was that all, or were you also checking some other resources at the same time? And um, also, I would like to ask, suppose you are using like predictive data, but if there are any players that you disagree with, were you using your own judgment to override them, or were you mostly following the prediction data?
Um, so taking the questions one by one. So firstly, my overall approach. So my approach was basically I had set out specific targets before last season started. So I wanted to get a top 1,000 MD rank.
Mm-hmm.
That was my main goal. And then I think I tweeted this out before the season began. I wanted to have sufficiently positive variance to finish 50K, I think was my goal. So I achieved one of those things and not the other.
Not bad enough.
So yeah, that was the philosophy. In terms of my data sources, pretty much just review. I mean, I still looked at some raw stuff before the season began on like new players. Like I checked out Holland's like
Mm-hmm.
long term, you know, NPXG per 90 on FBref, that kind of thing. Darwin as well, but really in terms of like a week to week basis, I was mostly just looking at review and then occasionally sense checking like, oh, Almiron's been on a run. Like, what's his NPXG looking like? Just to kind of sense check a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, mostly just review. To be honest, I think there are other good sources too. I know there's other like TalkVem has some good ones. You can use the odds data itself. I followed We Rogue's team strength and
Mm-hmm.
Simon's strength stuff too, but I don't think it necessarily directly fed into decisions. It was more a sense check. So pretty much just review. And then in terms of how strictly I followed review, it wasn't that strict, to be honest. It was my guidepost, but I deviated very frequently. I would say any given week, there's a pretty decent chance that I did not do the supposed like optimal move on
Mm-hmm.
whatever parameters I set. But it would usually be top 3 or top 5, or at least top 3 or top 5 after I tweaked X mins or whatever to my preference.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, pretty. I followed it consistently, but not super strictly, is the way I put it.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And so when you pick a player, let's say in the top five, suggestions, but it turns out that it was in terms of like the outcome, if it turns out that the top pick were able to get lots of points, but not your pick, how did that affect you? Like, did you regret like choosing the fifth best player instead of the best one? I mean, obviously there are lots of noise in FPL and things can go either way, but how did you
Um,
manage that?
I actually think so. The negative variance I experienced actually wasn't super clustered around the very tight decisions. I
Mm-hmm.
think the exception would be Holland versus Salah cap in the first half of the season.
Yeah.
I think there were a few of those that were very close, and I went Salah, and obviously I regretted it. Right. Um, the I don't know like what the exact right lesson to take away from that was. And honestly, I don't know if we'll know the right lesson until we see how Holland does this season too,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Because like
true.
even at the time, like as the first half of the season's unfolding, I think myself and a lot of other people, I think you were also in this boat, right?
Yeah.
Where you're going against Holland mostly for minutes, I think was our
Yeah.
logic. And then he puts up like the most minutes he ever has in a
Mm,
stretch, right?
true.
You look back and it's like if he puts up a season like last season in terms of minutes
Mm-hmm.
this season, then I think we can look back and say, we might want to update a bit on like how cautious to be around minutes on a player who's entering a new league, a new setting, etc. If this season his minutes drop down a lot, then I mean
We will
it's
be
cliche,
justified.
but yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, did I really mess up at the start of last season? So yeah, that was the main one where it was like tight. Um, a lot of other times when things blew up, it's either because I did something that I knew was like nowhere near optimal, quote
Mm.
unquote, in which
Yeah.
case I had no one to blame. Like I went Darwin over Jesus on game week 2 wildcard last
Mhm.
season, and I think you had to tweak Darwin's minutes like so much to justify that. So when I was doing that, I couldn't hide behind review, right? It's like I'm making a call on trying to be ahead of the curve. It blew up, you know, that's not a close call, right? Same thing, vice versa. You know, a lot of players would go on runs where it was like, I just don't care about this. Like Almiron's going on a run, I don't care. He's not close to the top of the solver at any point. I don't believe in underlying data, so I just don't care. I'll let him keep scoring. It just doesn't matter. So it was a mix, but yeah, I don't think I got burned a ton on like the very small decisions when it's like zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2 EV like in the next week.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. And I have seen this tweet from you around February. You said, "I chose the worst possible season to go full analytics. I have been super patient, trusted the EV, kept a deep squad, haven't taken a hit yet, and I am over 2 million. No choice but to simply do the same exact thing next year out of pure stubbornness and hope for the best." So I will ask two questions on this tweet. So how did you feel when you were at 2 million overall rank, despite all the support metrics were showing that, your decision making was okay? Like, did you feel that like you are making a mistake, or how was it?
Um, I didn't feel that I was making a mistake, or I mean, I had some doubts, but they weren't strong enough to make me change my style. So I kept the same style till the end of the season, and I'm going to do the same thing this season. So um, I think I had like minor doubts, but not enough to like change my behavior.
Mhm.
I mean, the psychology of it's kind of difficult to manage. So, like, pretty much from game week 2, which kicked off all this nonsense. If people don't remember, basically, Jesus got like 21 points, I think.
Mhm.
Everyone owned him. Darwin got a red card. So, yeah, that's since that swing, every really bad week, I would disengage pretty quickly, right? Like, I'd stay engaged in the beginning of the week, and then as soon as my chart on your website went down like -20 versus expectation, I just logged off. I was like, I logged off Twitter. I posted the chart, logged off Twitter, and then I check in like 6 days or whatever when
Yeah.
it was time to get my next team. So I think that was like healthy and helpful in managing the season. So yeah, when I was 2 mil, I was like, I'm gonna make my moves for next week, keep it super simple, super patient. If it starts blowing up, I'm just gonna immediately disengage again, and I'm just gonna keep doing that. And it worked out okay, relatively, in the end. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've taken away much lesson. I think I'm still in the stubborn boat for now.
Okay. So then I assume that you will be using almost the same approach this season too.
Yeah. So one caveat is, and we haven't talked about it yet, but I bench boosted week 1 last season,
Yeah, I was going to ask it.
which
Yeah.
yeah, which indirectly led to the game week 2 wild card, which was planned, but that in turn led to a whole waterfall of bad outcomes. So before I got on the bench boost 1 train last season, um, my approach heading in was to start off super conservatively.
Yeah.
So, like, still, respect EV, respect squad depth, respect minutes, have a good structure, be flexible. But if there are 50-50s where, it's quite close on the EV, but one guy is like, 80 to 100% EO amongst like engaged people that I care about, and the other is like 5%, I was just going to go with the 80% guy. And the reason for that was because I've consistently started slow every
Mhm.
FPL season I've played. And I think historically, before I got more into analytics, I had a very strong contrarian streak, which you see on a lot of people still, like on Twitter. And I hated the template. I hated being boxed in. I love taking punts. I love taking hits. And I basically realized I don't know why this is. Maybe it's just chance. But when I start taking risks in the last third of the season, it works. And when I take risks at the beginning, it blows up, like pretty reliably. So going into last season, I was like, okay, I'm just going to solve this problem for myself. I'm going to play it super straight and chalk opening half. And
Mhm.
then in the second half, hopefully I have a decent rank and I can actually push on properly. So that was my mentality going in. And then obviously bench boost one caught my eye, and we can go into like why.
11
Yeah, yeah.
fooled
But
everyone.
going into this season, I am absolutely not going to bench boost one under any
Okay,
circumstance.
that's good to
My
hear.
objective is going to be to hold the wild card, right? And so I'll set up my game week one team with a fairly long term view, which I actually think is a little different from how people are talking about it right now. And I think we should talk about that at some point too. But anyways, I'm going to do what I planned to do last season. Start off like very chalk, etc. If I really believe in a guy and believe there's EV to be had that's differential, I will do it. But when it's very close, I'm just going to go chalk. Like I don't want to start slow again.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, yeah, I was going to ask you about the bench boost one and if you were considering to do it again, but yeah, it's great to hear that you're not doing anything
I
crazy
mean,
this
like,
season.
I do think it was an interesting idea
Yeah.
last season, specifically based on the parts of last season that were unique, right?
Mm-hmm.
Namely, the extra wild card in the winter break, and the pricing to an extent. So it was interesting last season, but even last season, despite there being variables in its favor, when everyone ended up bench boosting, I don't remember when it was, 27 or whatever, I had the same bench as everyone else,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
barring like one player. So the whole logic of getting out of the way so that I could like run the leaner bench later was just completely pointless. So that kind of cemented to me like in that season where there were a lot of variables in its favor, it still ended up being pointless because I had the same bench as everyone else anyways, just no bench boost to use on it. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I mean, unless some new like variables come in to change how a season's structured again, I'm not really interested in bench boosting
Yeah. Okay.
early.
That makes sense. And one side question. So you have mentioned, starting the season, strongly. So in your decision making, does effective ownership play a role at all? Like, do you check how much a player is owned? Because you also mentioned that you know, use the templates and, being boxed in, but do you check? So suppose two players are very close in expected value and you don't have a personal feeling about either one of them. Like, do you use, how much they are owned as a tiebreaker or not?
Yeah, if it's early season, I have no like rank deficit I'm trying to solve overall or in a mini league. Then I'm agnostic on risk,
Mhm.
right? So I have no reason to pile risk on. I have no reason to mitigate it necessarily.
Mhm.
So in that scenario, early season, like game week one, if two players are extremely close, like on the data that I trust, and I don't have a hunch or an inside view of any kind, to your point, then yeah, I will use higher ownership as a tiebreaker. I think it's a really interesting conversation. I remember I don't really listen to many podcasts anymore, but I used to enjoy the episodes that Simon and We Rogue put out, like starting years ago. I guess they used to do it, and they had this one with Abdul FPL Salah that really stuck in my mind. This must have been like 2 or 3 years ago now,
Mhm.
where Simon and We Rogue, I think up to that point, and Simon's come back to this view now, had basically, believed that ownership should have precisely zero value in your consideration unless you want to pile on risk or
Mhm.
mitigate it for whatever reason. And then they talked to Abdul, and Abdul, at least temporarily, I think, convinced them and me and a lot of viewers that actually you should weight EO as a data point, independent of the risk factor.
Mm.
And his argument basically was that um, wisdom of the crowds,
Yeah.
right? Like high EO means that there's an aggregated opinion of a bunch of people, and depending on your worldview or your mental model of FPL specifically, you should assign some informational value to that aggregated opinion, right?
Yeah.
And I bought that logic, like it made sense to me. I think Simon has since steered away from that, and maybe this doesn't change, but last time I saw him tweet about it, he was saying that he's gone back to basically believing that you need to grab every edge you can, and the crowd is frequently wrong in correlated ways. So you should be like very happy to go against high EO and not consider it as like a data
Mhm.
point. I'm now in like I get both sides, and I think my like solution to your point is that exception you outlined about having your own strong opinion or some kind of inside view or edge, right?
Hmm.
So if I have like a good theory as to why the EO is mistakenly high, then to follow Simon's approach, I'm happy to farm some edge there, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, edge is vanishing. Like you got to take it where you can get it, right? But if I don't have any special reason or theory or whatever, and you got to be careful because it's easy to tell yourself a story, right? About like people eating pasta or whatever Andy Martin talks about. You got to be careful with it. But if you're being honest with yourself and you don't have that inside edge or whatever, then I do think I would assign like some informational value enough to break like a virtual tie. So
Mm.
that's my position right now.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot. And let's talk about the new season then. So you have mentioned that you will be using the obviously the expected value again, and we have just talked about the effective ownership, like as a tiebreaker. But other than these two, like, do you have a strategy in mind that you are hoping to change from last season to this season?
Um, all I'm thinking about really heading in from a drafting perspective is structure and flexibility. I'm not super concerned right now about specific assets.
Mm-hmm.
I already have a fairly developed hierarchy in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
When review comes out, I'll see if like there's any contradictions there, and then I'll investigate them. But like right now, like I don't think like Saka versus Martinelli is an interesting debate right now or whatever,
Yeah.
right? I think there are a couple interesting debates about assets, but broadly speaking, my mental hierarchy is like already fairly developed. So what I'm more interested in is like the structure than the assets, right? And then the structure will determine the assets. And I'm happy to sacrifice some EV if I think I'm setting up a more flexible structure. Something I mentioned earlier was like time frame. So on your last podcast with Johnny, I think he mentioned that he's going to be looking at the first like 7-ish weeks of the
Mm-hmm.
season when he's optimizing. Um, I agree with that. Like I'm going to be looking at the first like 5 to 8, I would say roughly. I really don't want to be forced into an early wild card. I would love to hold it until 18 or 19 if I can. I would love to avoid any hits if I can.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I'm thinking long term structure. What's going to allow me to access the best assets during the swings, right? And it's like you look at the swings, and for me, Chelsea and Liverpool like start becoming really interesting around like 3 and 4 roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Liverpool also have that game week 2 game, which is quite good. Um, and then Brighton get pretty bad after game week 3. And I see a lot of people like who, to my mind, they're basically just looking at the first 3 fixtures from what I can tell, the first 2 or 3,
Yeah.
right? And like they have the triple Brighton, like triple United is like locked. And I look at these teams and I'm like, it gets pretty bad after 3. I probably don't want 6 guys from these teams. I'd rather be flexible and not forced into like an early wild card. So I'm thinking long term. I'm thinking structurally. But like all that being said, review might have Matoma and Estupinan at like in 95% of solves over the
Mm-hmm.
first 7 weeks, like basic solver or whatever, in which case I'm not going to fight it either. But yeah, I'm trying to think long term, think structurally. I haven't tinkered that much. Like I made a draft at the beginning of this month. I haven't changed it that much. And I'm just going to wait till review comes out. Actually, I'm going on vacation next week. So I'm only going to have like 3 or 4 days with review before the
Okay.
first game, which I'm happy about because it's going to limit
Yeah,
the be like, I got to keep it basic, simple. So it should be fun.
that makes sense. Okay, I will ask you about your draft, but before that, when you talk about the structure, suppose you have two teams that I gave you to compare. So when you say that you will be looking at the structure, do you mean that you will prefer, like out of these two teams, you will prefer the team with, more alternative if more alternatives to replace if one of the players gets injured? That kind of a flexible. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of them. So the things that I group under structure when I'm thinking about it is number one, depth, um, and just like how much you're allocating on the tail, who your three bench players are, right? Lot of drafts right now have very light benches, and I think that's a serious mistake,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have Chelsea assets with like dicey X-Men City assets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number two is like formation, which relates to the depth, right? Because if you go three up top, it automatically gives you better depth because your 4.5 mid might get minutes, whereas your 4.5 forward won't, right?
Yeah.
So the formation and therefore like which assets you can move on and off more easily and how it relates to depth. And the last piece is like spots per team, right? So like structurally,
Mm.
it matters if you're starting with three Chelsea and you don't have like Nkunku or you don't have Sterling or you don't have James or whatever, because now structurally you're constrained on what you can move. So I think it's those three things, right? Because that's what shapes like 4 weeks from now or 5 weeks from now, like how will your options be constrained? That's how
Mm-hmm.
I think about structure.
So then to build this kind of a structure or team, suppose you are using review, you click optimize, it gave you a team where you be, I should say, like banning players that you see you think that are risky. I mean, obviously solvers usually prefer a heavier bench than most other people do. So do you kind of like ban players based on like if they're not very flexible in terms of replacing, or if they are injury prone, or maybe like a minute issue, or maybe it's because of the spots per team? Do you ban the players, or do you just uh, keep them but try to convince solver to drop them by maybe like reducing their expected minutes or something?
Yeah, so the broad approach I take is firstly, I don't get super sophisticated on solves. And this is why I say I'm an intermediate and I'm not necessarily planning to go beyond that. I don't have my own script that I run
Mm-hmm.
given certain inputs, even though I think that is the most effective strategy if you care about maximizing your rank. But I don't have my own script that I run. Even the review solver, I don't mess with the advanced settings that much. I really will just toggle like FT value, decay sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously like the basic settings like number of weeks out. So I really I use the review basic solver like very basically, and what I do is I tinker with it a bit to figure out what is the what is the most EV you're squeezing out with like reasonable teams without tinkering too much with the
Yeah.
parameters or the X-Mins. I look at the value over the time frame that I care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, like I said, it'll probably be like the first like 6 or 7 or 8 weeks, right? And I say, okay, that's my target now, EV wise, right? Whatever the number is. Like if it's over 7 weeks, it'll probably be in the region of what, like 350 or 400
Mm-hmm.
or something, right? So that's my target. And then I draft, like, I'll just draft players in that I like. I'm like, I like this guy. Let's put him in. Let's mess with the X-Mins a bit. And I'll just see, am I coming close without messing with the settings too much, right? And if I'm coming really close and I really like the structure and it's got guys that like I like putting in Everton guys. I do the opposite of banning them, which is the best thing to do. Because I'm an Everton fan, so I want to have their players. So I like putting them in. I'm probably gonna have Pickford. Like I don't really care if he's like a couple EV off over the first 7. I'm probably gonna have him. So I'll put in guys I like. I'll tweak the mins and stuff. I'll get a structure I like, and if it's close enough to what I consider the benchmark, then I'm happy. Then I'll just log off, make my team, and call it a day. So that's kind of how I use it. I use the optimal team as like my North Star, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to give up like too much EV against this. Um, and then I just do what I want within that constraint.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And who do you have in your draft then? Besides Pickford,
Um,
obviously.
yeah, I mean, I can read it out. Okay, I'll read it out. Let me find. So what I have right now, um, which again, like I haven't put in a ton of thought, but very, very roughly speaking, um, starting from the back, Pickford, and then in the defense, I've got Uh, Gabriel, Estupinian, Trent. I mean, nothing interesting there. James, although that's more of like a 5.5 placeholder. It could be
Hmm.
Chilwell, could be Diash, like whoever. Um, Henry and Riedewald. Henry again, like 4.5. I don't
Hmm.
think it matters that much, but like they have good fixtures. Um, and then in midfield, I've got Saka, Bumo, Rashford, and Sterling. And then up top, I got Jesus, DCL, and Holland.
Yeah.
Now, DCL is almost certainly not going to end up in there. I would love to have him just from Everton bias. And when everyone was going crazy on Twitter for like a week hyping him, I even then I was like, I would love to have him, but I don't think he's going to be like DCL and like the most terrible. And now I think everyone's kind of realized, yeah, he's definitely not going to be optimal. So he'll probably be like Jackson or Nkunku, and then I'll take money out of somewhere. Sterling will be Matoma or something probably, and
Mm.
I have point 0.5 of this draft. I honestly don't know. But anyways, like I said, like the specific guys, it's like I'll wait for a review. But like structurally, what I think are the big structural decisions here are like number one, I have Trent, right?
Yeah.
Number two, I've got three up top.
Hmm.
And number three, I've got decent depth, like nothing crazy. I'm not rotating keepers. I have like Joao Virginia
Hmm.
as the keeper, but like decent depth, right? Like I'm benching James and Henry week one in theory with this team. If I got Nkunku and Matoma, it would be the same story. So I'm not certain on any of those structural decisions yet. I like the front three. I've every draft I've had has been three up top. It seemed pretty popular on Twitter recently, just because it gives you that 4.5 like playing guy in midfield.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm not sure. But yeah, Trent, depth, and three up top is what I'm right now favoring. Um, we'll see.
Yeah. And yeah, I forgot to ask a question on this, like building the draft. For example, for this team or any other draft you will come up with until the game week one, do you schedule any transfers? Because like things like having Salah for the first two game week and then replacing him with De Bruyne or someone else is an idea. So do you go for these kind of stuff, or are you trying to, stay away from it because there's a possibility of taking a hit because of it?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to avoid booking transfers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it might turn out when review comes out that Salah captain game week two is so important that you know if you're optimizing for even like 5 weeks, like not even 2 weeks, but even 5 weeks, it's like he's got to be in there. If that's the case, then fine. It is what it is. Like I don't mind having him to captain home Bournemouth. If I have to take a -4 in game week three with the rest of Twitter, like so be it. But ideally, I would like to avoid an early hit. I like to avoid booking transfers. That's why I kind of like Trent over Salah, right? Because Trent, you just hold, right? I think, barring a fitness issue, if you like him and if he's decent on review, you just hold him for 7 or 8 weeks. I think his first 7 or 8 fixtures are perfectly fine. I think people are really over-indexing on the first three. I think he can get a lot of cleans, a lot of points. And you don't have to sell him immediately. It's really him in a straight shot against like the other 8 to 9 million attackers. There's some implications for like depth, obviously, from that swap, but from a first principles approach, like the first point of analysis is like I'm comparing Trent against like Jesus, Rashford, Saka, Bruno, Martinelli, Odegaard, Son, right?
Yeah.
And I look at that list, and he's top three for me pretty easily right now. At worst, maybe fourth or fifth, but you can have 4 or 5 of those guys, right? Along with a good team because of the way the pricing is. So I've been pretty bullish on Trent. Like, we'll see what review says. I think the only way, not the only way, the most likely scenario where I don't have Trent is where I have Salah, because I don't think Trent and Salah is super feasible. Um, but if Salah's not popping up super high, I'm probably going to take Trent over like at least a couple of these 8 to 9 million other guys.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. And so one question we have received related to this talk from FPL Double Pogi asked, how much EV do you allow yourself to ignore on review when making decisions? So in this context, for example, when you said you might have Salah if the EV is quite significant. So what's that threshold for you? I mean, sometimes I understand that it's hard to give a number, but do you have anything that you use?
Yeah, so on a multi-week time frame, right? If I'm trying to make a
Mm-hmm.
decision as it pertains to the next like 5 or 6 weeks or so, um, if I've established an EV benchmark, let's say it's because Salah's the best over 5 weeks, and okay, with Salah you get a certain EV typically. Over 5 or 6 weeks, I wouldn't want to give up more than like 2 or 3 expected points on
Yeah.
review around that range. It depends again on like if I believe I have a, a strong view or some kind of edge against the crowd or the model for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's basically going to boil down to minutes most of the time. Like I think minutes is really the only area now where you can like reliably beat review when it comes to like straight up this player versus that player type decisions. But yeah, barring anything like that, I don't want to give up more than like 2 or 3 because if you multiply it out over a season, right? We have like 38 weeks. If you're giving up more than like, let's say half an EV per week, right? Which is what 2 or 3 over 5 or 6 weeks comes out to.
Mm-hmm.
Giving up like 15 to 20 versus the field being like people who stick closer to review, right? And or are like skilled enough that they end up being close to that. And it's like 15 to 20 points is kind of a lot over a season to give up. So I really don't like to like give up more than that over those kinds of time frames, but I'll do it if I have to. And then on a 1 week straight shot, like captaincy, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is the 1 week. I wouldn't want to give up more than like point 0.3, which
Point
is
three.
which is similar to that one, right? So like
Yeah.
if one captain is like, whatever, 5.7 and the other is 5.2, it's going to take a lot for me to go with the 5.2 guy.
Yeah.
And the main reason I do it is if I'm piling on risk for some reason, like it's late and I'm not happy with my rank, or if I think I have an inside view, like a really strong inside view for some reason, or like if the other really good metrics support it. So like I like to tick sorry I like to tick the max odds slider and
Mm-hmm.
compare cast on that versus like minimum odds. And if the odds guy is like close or better, then I'm like, okay, there's like some argument here. But yeah, I don't like to give up, too much.
Okay. Awesome. All right. We're getting closer to the end, so I will ask you some lighter questions. The first one is this. Why are you not on the analytics Discord? People are wondering if you're addicted to X or Twitter.
X being the website formerly known as Twitter.
Formerly known as Twitter,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I was definitely addicted to Twitter. I don't know if I'm going to be addicted to X because its leader seems intent on degrading the product experience. So maybe he'll save me from my addiction. And X is where I step off the train. Um, no, I mean, yeah, I definitely use Twitter like a lot more than I would want to in an ideal world.
Mhm.
Discord, I was on Discord, not for FPL, but I've been on Discord before. I found the UI like very overwhelming at a certain point where it's like the different groups and like the stream of like it's just like a lot of like big group chats essentially, which I'm in some group chats that I really like based on formerly twitter.com, right? But they're like not that big and people aren't spamming them all the time. Like but who knows? Maybe I'll reopen Discord. People have mentioned the Discord analytics group to me a bunch of times. It seems like it's a great spot, and that's definitely where like the edge is, right? So I'm definitely giving up edge. So maybe I should download it and like stop being on Twitter so much.
You should. Actually, I was going to ask you about Twitter in general. So, I mean, some of your tweets are really funny. Some of them are, sarcastic. Some of them are really sharp. I mean, we love it, like in general. I mean, when you visit the Discord, Analytics Discord, you will see that lots of tweets from you that we have shared and laughed. So, but how is social media affecting your experience in general regarding FPL? You have mentioned that when you are having a bad game week, you just log off from Twitter. So I understand that when you are having a bad game week, it's obviously it's a negative experience. I usually make the mistake of staying and then getting even angrier. But in
Yeah.
general, do you think it's a net positive or net negative for you?
Um, it's a difficult question. It kind of feeds into like why do I play FPL in general? Why does anybody play FPL?
What's the meaning of life?
Yeah. I mean, when I start thinking about like why I play FPL, the only conclusion I can come to is that like I should stop. And
I love it.
I really admire the people who've like retired. So like We Rogue retired,
Chase the
Lucy, yeah, Chase, Lucy. So I look at them and I'm like I envy them. It's like they've achieved because it's like I mean, it's not set up. It's not an activity or a game, however what you want to view it, that's set up to reward the kind of effort that the super nerds like myself and obviously yourself want to put into it.
yeah,
Like there's all these areas of life where if you put in extraordinary effort, you get truly extraordinary rewards of many different kinds, right? Like just intrinsic reward. Like, for example, I mean, I have a few other hobbies. I love working out, right? Working out is great because it's like linear progress. I mean, that's
yeah,
not 100% true, but like essentially, if you have the knowledge, you put in the effort, you get results. It's consistent, right? And you know, the problem with FPL is it's like the diminishing returns to effort and taking it seriously kick in like pretty early once you like if you're playing somewhat patiently, you're using somewhat decent data, right? You're not letting yourself get tilted. Um, it's hard to squeeze out a bunch more edge from that
yeah.
and reliably finish 10K instead of just like winning your mini league and finishing 40K or whatever. So I think my like near term resolution is a spend less time like on FPL in avenues that are unproductive, like tinkering a lot, like earnestly getting into like long debates on Twitter or whatever, and just try and like use the time more wisely and be more realistic about outcomes, which last season already kicked my ass, so I'm pretty realistic now. And then secondly, like social media wise, I mean, I like basically the part of Twitter that I like is like just shit posting. Oh, sorry, that was
It's okay. Yeah.
I like just like chatting nonsense, stream of consciousness, memes, whatever. Um, there's a bunch of hilarious people on there, and FPL as an avenue to just sort of like have fun on Twitter is, I think, like the best possible use for it. So, um, I think my resolution is to like not necessarily tweet less, but to tweet less seriously for sure. Um, and just use it as like a place to have a laugh because it's just not worth it's not worth like trying to put your heart and soul into finishing like 10K or whatever because it's just you're not going to get it reliably.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I think it's a good point to promote Analytics Discord one more time here because obviously, as you have mentioned, FPL is not a logical activity or hobby for anyone in general. Like there's lots of heartbreaks in it. Like you put the hours, but you don't usually get the outcome you want or hope or maybe deserve, I should say. But yeah, we are kind of trying to motivate people to learn more about analytics so that they can maybe use it in other parts of their lives. But yeah, in general, I think, yeah. So I thought about retiring from FPL very seriously over this summer, but yeah, probably I will be playing this season, but maybe next season I will reevaluate my decision after if I have a terrible season. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, you can just do a middle ground, right? But like, the problem is, I mean, we're on like a FPL podcast right now. Like, it's obviously difficult for us to take a middle ground approach to this. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Okay, that concludes our fascinating conversation with Formadillo. He's an analytics legend already, whose brilliant analytical season is shadowed by the unlucky outcomes and extremely negative variance. I hope it was an eye-opening experience for our listeners in terms of what can go wrong and how random FPL can be at times. But despite all the negative variance, how people are still willing to try analytics and try analytics in their upcoming season again. Formadillo, while your season may not have been what you had hoped for, your journey has undoubtedly left a lasting impact on the FPL analytics community. We talked about your season quite a bit, and thanks for bringing your unique perspective and also reminding us that there is, um, value in analytics and decision making with expected value despite the outcome. It was a true pleasure to have you on this show, and thank you so much for joining us. We wish you the best of luck this season, and I'm hoping to have you as a guest maybe next, summer. This time, talking about how your luck regressed to the mean, and then how lucky you got, and then got a really good finish. And is there anything else you want to add before we close the episode?
No, I mean it was a pleasure. It was fun to talk about all this stuff, and yeah, hopefully I'm in a place to have that conversation in a year. So
Yeah, let's hope. And to our listeners and viewers, thank you a lot for tuning in. Before game week 1, we will record an episode or maybe 2 with Buzz, and you will see how the new format is we have in mind for you. Episodes will be much shorter than usual, and they will be more to the point, and we will try to keep sharing video versions on YouTube. So in case you prefer seeing the data and visualizations and the tables, we might be talking in the podcast. And with this, until next time, stay curious and stay analytical. Goodbye.